3 weeks ago, security called while I was reviewing a vendor contract in a glass conference room overlooking Highway 101. The receptionist's voice was steady, almost bored. "Ms. Davis, there's a Richard Davis at the front gate. He says he's your father. He says it's urgent." My hands went cold. 6 years. 6 years since I stood on my parents' porch in Palo Alto with my 5-year-old son and one suitcase after losing my job and my apartment overnight. 6 years since my mother's voice came through the intercom and said, "We don't want trouble. He's too loud." 6 years since I turned around and never knocked again. And now he was at my gate. I thought, heart attack, stroke, cancer, something that made even pride bend. But when I walked into the lobby of my gated apartment complex in Santa Clara and saw my father sitting alone on the leather bench, clutching a thick manila envelope like it was a life vest, I realized something worse. He wasn't there to give me bad news. He was there to ask for something. I told my assistant I'd be back in 30 minutes and took the elevator down to the lobby. Creekstone Heights had security cameras in every corner and key fob access on every door. I'd chosen it that way. After years of instability, I wanted gates. I wanted barriers. I wanted to decide who got in. The glass doors slid open and I saw him. Richard Davis, 68 now. Thinner than I remembered. His hair more gray than brown. His shirt wrinkled, collar slightly bent. Not the polished, retired engineer from Palo Alto who used to lecture me about financial planning and long-term vision. He looked smaller. When he saw me, he stood too fast, like he was afraid I might disappear. "Brooklyn," he said. I kept my distance. 3 steps between us. Professional. Measured. "Is Mom okay?" I asked. That was the only reason I would have come down. He blinked. Just for a fraction of a second. "Your mother's fine." Relief rushed in and drained out just as quickly. "Then what is this?" I asked. He glanced toward the security desk, then back at me. "We shouldn't talk here. It's about Tyler, and about the money." The money. 6 years ago, that word would have made my throat close. Now it made my spine straighten. "I have 20 minutes, I said. "There's a cafe across the street." We walked in silence. He moved a little slower than I remembered. I didn't offer to help him. He didn't ask. The cafe smelled like espresso and warm milk. I ordered a black coffee. He tried to pay. I slid my card across the counter before he could finish reaching for his wallet. We sat at a corner table near the exit. I chose that seat on purpose. "How's Mason?" he asked, fingers tightening around the manila envelope. "You don't get to start there," I said evenly. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. He slid the envelope across the table toward me. It was thick, official, the kind of paper that hums with consequences. "Tyler's business collapsed," he said. "Completely. The gyms are closed. He filed for bankruptcy." I didn't react. I'd heard rumors through old mutual acquaintances in the Bay Area fitness scene. Boutique chains had been struggling for years. "There's a trustee reviewing past transfers," he continued. "They're looking at everything. Loans, gifts, investments." I opened the envelope. Legal documents. A notice referencing potential fraudulent transfer review. A date from 6 years ago highlighted in yellow. The week my stock liquidation payout hit my account. $220,000. 8 years of startup equity converted into survival money. The money I never got to use. My voice stayed calm. "What does this have to do with me?" He cleared his throat. "If the trustee determines that the transfer from your account to ours wasn't a legitimate gift to your brother, they can claw it back. They could come after the house. Your mother and I could lose everything." Lose everything. The phrase hung between us like smoke. I looked at the next page. An affidavit. It stated that I, Brooklyn Davis, had voluntarily and knowingly gifted $220,000 to my brother Tyler Davis as family financial support to stabilize his business operations. I let out a quiet breath. "You want me to sign this?" I said. "It protects all of us," he replied quickly. "It shows it was a family decision, not exploitation, not misconduct." Exploitation? Interesting choice of word. "When were you planning to tell me that you'd moved my money?" I asked. His eyes flickered. "We thought we explained that at the time. You were in a difficult place. You were unstable. We didn't want you making emotional financial decisions." I stared at him. 6 years ago, I had been sleeping in my car with a 5-year-old boy in the back seat, and they had decided I was the risky one. "If I don't sign?" I asked. He swallowed. "This could get messy. Bankruptcy court isn't private. Attorneys will dig. They'll question intent. It could look deliberate." Deliberate. The transfer had happened within 24 hours of the deposit. "I didn't authorize it," I said. "You were on the joint account," he replied quickly. "Legally, it was allowed." Legally allowed. Morally erased. I looked down at the affidavit again. My name typed neatly at the bottom. A blank line waiting for a signature that would rewrite 6 years of silence. 6 years of working 3 jobs. 6 years of rebuilding credit. 6 years of never asking them for anything again. "You said it was urgent," I said quietly. "It is," he replied. "We could lose the house." 6 years ago, they had chosen which house to save. I closed the envelope and pushed it back across the table. "If I sign this," I said, meeting his eyes for the first time, "I'm rewriting history, and I don't rewrite history anymore." His face paled slightly. "Brooklyn, I'll review this with my own attorney," I cut in. "And if we're going to talk about what happened 6 years ago, we're going to talk about all of it." I stood, coffee untouched. 6 years ago, I stood outside their door and waited to be let in. Now they were the ones asking me to open one, and this time I was the one holding the keys. To understand why I didn't sign that paper, you have to understand the night they closed the door. 6 years ago, I was 30 years old and still believed hard work could outrun bad timing. The startup I'd given 8 years of my life to collapsed on a Tuesday morning. One email. That was all it took. Funding withdrawn. Operations suspended effective immediately. Our Slack channels exploded. Half the team thought it was a mistake. The other half were already updating LinkedIn. I sat at my desk in San Jose staring at the equity dashboard I'd checked 100 times before. Those shares were supposed to be my cushion, my leap of faith, my proof that choosing risk over stability meant something. By Friday, payroll froze. By the end of the month, my landlord posted a notice on my apartment door. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no sheriff. Just a white paper taped neatly at eye level. Past due. Vacate within 30 days. Mason asked if we were moving somewhere. Cool. I told him yes. I lied like mothers do when they're trying to buy time. The apartment got quieter as the boxes stacked up. Not because Mason was loud, because I was thinking. I had one real option. My parents' house in Palo Alto. 4 bedrooms, a guest suite, a 2-car garage that never held cars. I didn't need money from them. I needed time. A few weeks in Seattle on a contract project I'd been offered. Enough to stabilize, to bridge the gap until my equity payout processed. 3 months, the HR email said. Stock liquidation payout estimated at $220,000. Processing pending final dissolution. $220,000. It wasn't a miracle. It was math. 8 years of vesting finally converting into something tangible. All I needed was 3 weeks of childcare. I packed everything we could carry into 1 large suitcase and 2 duffel bags. Mason insisted on bringing his green dinosaur. I let him. There wasn't much else left to choose from. The drive from San Jose to Palo Alto felt longer than it ever had. Mason hummed in the back seat. I rehearsed the conversation in my head. Calm, direct, temporary. When we pulled up, the house looked exactly the same. Trimmed hedges, porch light on, curtains drawn but glowing softly from inside. "Grandma's house," Mason said, smiling. I swallowed and grabbed the suitcase. I rang the doorbell. The small red light on the camera flicked on immediately. Recording. I could see movement behind the curtains, a shadow, someone standing just out of sight. I rang again. The intercom crackled. "Yes?" My mother's voice, not surprised, not warm, just measured. "It's me," I said. "Brooklyn, I lost the apartment. I have a short contract in Seattle. I just need you to watch Mason for a few weeks until the payout clears. That's it." Silence on the other end. Not confusion, not concern, calculation. "We don't want trouble," she said finally. My grip tightened on the suitcase handle. "There's no trouble, just a short-term solution." "He's too loud," she replied flatly. "Your father and I aren't in a place to handle that." Mason looked up at me, confused. He wasn't loud. He was 5. "I'm not asking you to raise him," I said carefully. "Just a few weeks." "You need to deal with the consequences of your choices," she said. "We're retired. We value our peace." Peace. Through the curtain, I saw the outline of my father's shoulder. He didn't come to the speaker. He didn't say a word. "Mom?" I tried once more, my voice lower now. "We don't have anywhere else tonight." A pause. Then, "Try a hotel." Click. The intercom went silent. The porch light stayed on. Mason tugged my hand. "Grandma mad at me?" The question split something open inside me. "No," I said, because he deserved that answer. "She's not mad at you." I stood there for maybe 20 seconds more. Long enough for hope to feel foolish. I could have knocked again. I could have raised my voice. I could have cried. Instead, I picked up the suitcase. "Come on, baby," I said. We walked back to the car. I didn't look back. That night, we slept in the parking lot of a grocery store in Mountain View. Mason curled up in the back seat with his dinosaur. I cracked the windows just enough for air and watched headlights sweep across the windshield until well past midnight. At 2:17 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Email from the startup's liquidation administrator. "Your equity payout has been finalized. Funds scheduled for transfer within 5 business days." I read the number twice. $220,000. Enough for a security deposit. Enough for stability. Enough to never stand on that porch again. I leaned back against the driver's seat and closed my eyes. They had closed their door, but the money was coming. I whispered it to myself in the dark. I won't ever need them again. Mason shifted in his sleep and murmured something I couldn't understand. I didn't know then that by the time the money hit my account, it would already belong to someone else. The money hit my account on a Monday morning. I was sitting at the small kitchen table in my coworker Jenna's apartment in Sunnyvale, drinking coffee that wasn't mine, refreshing my banking app like it was a heartbeat monitor. There it was, $220,000. For a second, I just stared at the number. It didn't feel real. It felt like oxygen after weeks of holding my breath. I could see it already. First month's rent, security deposit, a used car that didn't rattle when I turned it on. Mason in 1 daycare instead of 2, groceries without calculating every item. I took a screenshot immediately. Something in me, even then, didn't trust good news without proof. Jenna walked past in her robe and smiled. "Is that it?" "That's it," I said, my voice shaking despite myself. I let myself imagine stability for exactly 12 hours. The next morning, I logged in again. The balance was almost 0. For a moment, I thought I'd opened the wrong account. I checked the account number, checked the app version, logged out and back in. $220,000 had been transferred out. The transaction timestamp was clear, 23 hours after the deposit. Transferred to account ending in 7831. I knew that number. Joint checking account. Opened when I was 19. Just in case. My father had said at the time, "It's easier if I can help you manage things when you're young." Back then, it felt practical, responsible. Now it felt like a trapdoor. My hands started to shake. I called the bank immediately. After navigating 3 layers of automated menus, a woman named Karen answered in a voice trained to stay neutral. "There's been a transfer from my account," I said. $220,000. I didn't authorize it. She asked for verification details. I gave them. "I see the transfer," she said. "It was executed by a secondary joint account holder." "My father," I said. "Yes, ma'am. As a joint holder, he has authorization to transfer funds." I didn't approve that. "There's no fraud reported on this account," she replied gently. "Legally, it was permissible." Legally permissible. I hung up before my voice cracked. Mason was in the living room building a Lego tower on Jenna's rug. I walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against it. I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello? Where is my money?" I asked. Silence. Then, calmly, "Brooklyn, we moved it for safekeeping." Safekeeping. "You transferred $220,000 out of my account," I said slowly, without telling me. "You were in a volatile situation," she replied. "Couch surfing. No permanent address. We didn't want you making emotional financial decisions." I closed my eyes. "I was planning to secure housing for your grandson." "And you will," she said, "once things stabilize." "What things?" I asked. A pause. "Tyler needed help." There it was. "Help with what?" I demanded. "His gym properties were at risk," she said. "He was facing foreclosure on the Mountain View house. It was temporary. We stepped in." "We." "You stepped in with my money." "It's family money," she corrected. "It was my payout." "You're both our children," she said, like that settled something. I hung up and called Tyler. He answered on speaker, the sound of traffic in the background. "Hey, Brooke. Did you know they transferred my payout?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "They mentioned you were contributing," he said carefully. "As a bridge." "A bridge?" I repeated. "I was about to lose the property," he said. "It would have destroyed the expansion plan. Mom and Dad said you understood." "Understood." "I was sleeping in my car," I said. He didn't respond to that. "Look," he continued, irritation creeping in. "The boutique fitness market was unstable. I needed liquidity fast. I'm stabilizing now. It's not like the money's gone." "Then return it," I said. "It's tied up," he snapped. "Operational expenses, vendor payments. You don't understand how scaling works." I ended the call. That afternoon, I texted my parents. "I need $2,500 for a security deposit. That's all." "Please," my mother replied an hour later. "Not right now. Funds are committed. Committed. To Tyler's expansion." That night, I scrolled through Instagram. Tyler had posted a photo from Lake Tahoe. Snow behind him. Arms wide. Caption, "Saved the property." Family always has your back. 2 days later, another post. Brand new BMW X5. Shiny black. Hashtag hard work. I checked the timestamp. Same week the transfer cleared. My stomach felt hollow. I went back to my banking app and downloaded the full statement as a PDF. Then I downloaded the transaction history from the joint account. Every withdrawal, every date, every memo line. I took screenshots of Tyler's posts, archived them in a folder labeled Timeline. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I documented. The following week, I texted again. I need help covering daycare this month, just until I get the new contract payment. No response. 2 days later, my mother sent one line. You need to learn stability. Stability. I stared at the word until it blurred. Mason came into the room holding his dinosaur. Are we getting our own house soon? He asked. Soon, I said. I wasn't asking them for permission anymore, but I was learning something. They hadn't just moved my money. They'd moved the line between us, and if they ever tried to tell the story differently, I was going to have proof of exactly when it changed. They said it was temporary, that Tyler would pay it back once things stabilized, that the transfer was just a bridge, a strategic move, a smart family decision. I waited. The first year after the transfer, I was too busy surviving to argue. I worked 3 jobs, a short-term contract with a logistics software firm in San Jose during the day, remote QA testing at night after Mason went to sleep, weekend warehouse inventory shifts in Milpitas that left my back aching and my hands raw from cardboard. Mason bounced between budget daycare centers and Jenna's spare room when schedules didn't line up. I learned which grocery stores marked down produce after 8 p.m. I learned how to stretch a tank of gas 3 extra days. My credit score dipped below where landlords wanted it to be. Twice, I was approved for an apartment and then rejected when they reviewed my recent instability. Each time, I texted my parents the same thing. Just $2,500 for the deposit. I'll repay you within 3 months. The responses were always polite. Not right now. You need to build consistency first. We can't enable short-term thinking. Enable. I stopped replying after the 3rd time. Meanwhile, Tyler's life looked glossy. He opened a second boutique gym location in Sunnyvale, posted ribbon-cutting photos, posted group fitness selfies, posted about building generational wealth. At church events, my mother told relatives I was figuring things out, that I had always been impulsive, that Tyler had a steady entrepreneurial mind, golden child, problem daughter. I heard it through cousins, through old neighbors, through Aunt Eleanor, who never repeated their words without a look of quiet disapproval. He refinanced the Mountain View place, she told me one afternoon over tea. That must have been around when your payout happened. I checked public records. The refinancing date matched the week my money left my account. It wasn't just that they had saved him, they had positioned him to expand. 2 years later, Tyler doubled down. He leveraged the gym chain further, opening 2 more locations across the Bay Area. Boutique fitness was booming. Spin classes, infrared yoga, high-end memberships with eucalyptus towels. My parents quietly co-signed a major loan using their primary home in Palo Alto as collateral. They didn't tell me. I found out because Aunt Eleanor mentioned, "Your parents seem nervous about something financial." I connected the dots. My payout had been the stabilizer. Their house had become the next chip on the table. I texted my father once more. Is the Palo Alto house tied to Tyler's loans? He responded with a single sentence. We're managing it. Managing it. By then, I had stopped asking for anything. I blocked their numbers after my mother told me I needed to accept responsibility for my life choices. Responsibility. I had accepted it the night I slept in a grocery store parking lot. Year 3, I got promoted to senior project manager at the logistics firm I'd contracted with. Year 4, I earned an operations certification that doubled my salary band. Year 5, I moved Mason into a better elementary school in Santa Clara. We moved into Creekstone Heights, the gated apartment complex with security and coded entry and cameras in every hallway. I chose it deliberately. I wanted gates. I kept the folder, every bank statement, every text thread, every screenshot of Tyler's hard work pays off posts beside my own Venmo requests for daycare money that were ignored. Not because I planned revenge, because I didn't trust memory anymore. Year 6, cracks started showing. Boutique fitness wasn't booming anymore. Rents increased. Memberships dropped. I heard through industry contacts that 2 of Tyler's locations were behind on lease payments. Then Aunt Eleanor called me one evening. Your brother's in trouble again, she said quietly. How bad? I asked. She hesitated. Worse than last time. I went online and checked public filings. Tyler Davis Enterprises LLC had a lien filed against it. 2 vendors suing for unpaid invoices. A month later, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. A pre-foreclosure notice attached to my parents' Palo Alto address, their primary residence, the house they refused to open to me. I stared at the document for a long time. 6 years earlier, they had chosen which house to save. They had chosen Tyler's Mountain View property over their daughter and grandson. Now, the gamble was circling back. 2 weeks after I found that notice, security called me at work.
Ms. Davis, there's a Richard Davis at the front gate. He says it's urgent.
Back at the cafe, my father stirred his coffee without drinking it.
Tyler filed Chapter 7, he said. The trustee is reviewing everything. Loans, gifts, transfers. He slid the affidavit toward me again. If they decide that transfer wasn't a legitimate gift, he continued, they can claw it back. They could accuse us of fraudulent conveyance. They could take the house. I held his gaze. 6 years ago, they had watched me lose mine. Now they were asking me to protect theirs. If I don't sign, I said quietly, what happens? He didn't answer immediately. Then this becomes a lawsuit, he said finally, and it won't stay private. Private, as if that was what I had lost. I looked down at the paper. 6 years of silence had led to this. They hadn't come to repair a relationship. They had come to manage liability. And for the first time in 6 years, I felt something other than anger. I felt leverage. The affidavit lay between us like a weapon wrapped in polite language. I read every line slowly. I, Brooklyn Davis, acknowledge that the transfer of $220,000 was a voluntary gift to my brother, Tyler Davis, for the purpose of supporting his business operations. Voluntary, gift, supporting. Each word scrubbed clean of context. I looked up at my father. You want me to sign this? It protects all of us, he said quickly. If the bankruptcy trustee believes it was a legitimate family gift, they won't claw it back. They won't accuse us of fraudulent transfer. Us. The way he said it made it sound like we were on the same side. What happens if I don't sign? I asked. He rubbed his forehead. Then they start digging. They'll examine intent, timing. They'll ask why the money moved within 24 hours. They could argue it was designed to shield assets. It was designed to save Tyler's property, I said. He didn't deny it. They could drag you into it, he continued. Subpoena bank records. Make you testify. It won't be private, Brooklyn. Private. The irony almost made me laugh. Did you consult a lawyer before moving the money? I asked. No. Did Tyler know it wasn't explicitly authorized? He hesitated. We assumed you understood, he said carefully. Did he know I was sleeping in my car? I asked. He looked down at the table. That wasn't the point. It had been the only point. He pushed the envelope closer. Your brother's business collapsed. He's filed Chapter 7. The trustee is reviewing all transfers made within the look-back period. If this appears improper, it could escalate. To criminal exposure? I asked evenly. His silence answered for him. The thought didn't scare me the way he expected it to. It clarified something. You're not here because you miss Mason, I said. You're here because the paperwork caught up with you. His jaw tightened. We're family. Family doesn't move money in the dark. He leaned forward. You were unstable at the time. You had no permanent address. You were making reactive decisions. I was trying to secure housing for your grandson. You would have spent it emotionally, he insisted. On rent, on daycare, on not sleeping in a parking lot. I closed the affidavit and slid it back toward him. I'm not signing this today.
His expression shifted from persuasion to irritation. Brooklyn, lawyers complicate things. You brought lawyers first, I said. This was drafted by Tyler's bankruptcy attorney, wasn't it? He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. So here's what's going to happen, I continued. I'm going to have this reviewed by my own attorney. He stiffened. That's unnecessary. It's necessary for me. You're escalating this. No, I said calmly. You escalated it when you moved the money. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe noise hummed around us. Cups clinked. A blender whirred somewhere behind the counter. Ordinary sounds layered over something that had never been ordinary. What do you want? He asked finally. There it was. Not apology, not acknowledgement, negotiation. I want transparency, I said. If we're going to talk about that transfer, we talk about all of it. He frowned. All of what? The porch, I said. The timing, the withdrawals, the refinancing on the Mountain View property, the co-signed loan on your house. His eyes widened slightly. You've been researching, he said. I've been documenting. He leaned back in his chair, as if recalculating. Tyler doesn't handle confrontation well, he said. Neither did I 6 years ago, I replied. I stood, grabbing my bag. I'll arrange a meeting, I said. You, Mom, Tyler, neutral location. That's not necessary. It is for me. And if Tyler refuses? Then I file a civil claim, I said simply. And let the trustee review everything without clarification. His face paled. You'd sue your own family? You moved my life savings without consent. He opened his mouth to argue, and then closed it again. You have 48 hours to consider whether you want this handled privately, I said. After that, I speak with counsel and proceed accordingly. Brooklyn, I won't be rushed, I cut in. You weren't rushed when you transferred the funds. I walked out of the cafe before he could respond. In my car, I sat for a full minute without turning the engine on. My hands weren't shaking this time. I pulled up my old folder on my phone. Screenshots, bank statements, time-stamped transfers, Tyler's Tahoe photo beside my daycare request. I opened a browser and typed 3 words, adult child financial exploitation. The search results were clear. Unauthorized financial control, abuse of joint account authority, improper transfer under bankruptcy scrutiny. I found a law firm in San Jose specializing in financial exploitation and asset recovery. I called. Hayes and Moreno. A receptionist answered. I need to speak with someone about a joint account transfer and potential bankruptcy exposure, I said. There was a brief pause. Is this regarding a family member? She asked. Yes. Hold, please. As I waited, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. 6 years ago, I had stood outside a door asking to be let in. Today, they were the ones asking me to open one. By the time we met again, I wouldn't be walking in alone. Aunt Eleanor's dining room didn't look like a battlefield, but that's what it became. She'd cleared the long oak table and set out 4 chairs on one side, 2 on the other. A laptop sat open at the head of the table, already connected to the television mounted on the wall. The blinds were half drawn. Afternoon light cut the room into sharp lines. My attorney, Victoria Hayes, appeared on the screen right at 2 o'clock. Crisp blazer, neutral expression, calm voice. Good afternoon, she said. My parents arrived together. My mother walked in first, chin high, lips pressed thin. My father followed, carrying a folder I recognized immediately. Tyler came last, sunglasses still on, irritation radiating off him like heat. This feels dramatic, Tyler muttered as he took a seat. This feels necessary, I replied. No one hugged. No one asked about Mason. Victoria introduced herself. We're here to review the timeline of the $220,000 transfer before any affidavit is discussed. My mother crossed her arms. This is still a family matter. It became a legal matter the moment bankruptcy court began reviewing past transfers, Victoria said evenly. Tyler leaned back in his chair. We're wasting time. Brooklyn just needs to confirm it was a gift. I didn't respond. I turned the laptop slightly and pressed play. The porch filled the screen. 6 years ago. Me standing under that porch light, Mason clutching his dinosaur. My voice strained but steady. We just need a few weeks. The intercom crackled. We don't want trouble. My mother's voice, clear as if she were sitting in the room with us now. He's too loud. Mason's small voice followed. Grandma mad at me? The room went silent. Tyler shifted in his seat. My father stared at the table. My mother inhaled sharply. That's not the full context, she said quickly. That was the full door, I replied. I paused the video at the moment I turned away with the suitcase. That was the same week the transfer happened, I said. Victoria nodded slightly on the screen. Let's move to the financial timeline. I clicked to the next document. Bank statement. Deposit, $220,000. Time-stamped Monday, 9:14 a.m. Next page. Transfer out, $220,000. Tuesday, 8:47 a.m. Destination, joint account ending, 7831. Then the withdrawals. $85,000 toward Mountain View property arrears, $40,000 vendor settlement, $60,000 operational payroll. Dates aligned neatly in a column. Tyler, Victoria said, did you verify explicit consent from the primary account holder before accepting these funds? He bristled. My parents told me it was family money. That wasn't the question, she replied. He looked at me. You knew I was in trouble. I knew you posted a Tahoe photo the same week I was denied a $2,500 deposit, I said. His jaw tightened. I clicked again. Instagram screenshot. Caption. Saved the property. Family always has your back. Time-stamped 3 days after the transfer.
That's not evidence of wrongdoing,
Tyler snapped. It's evidence of timing, Victoria said. And timing is central in bankruptcy review. My mother leaned forward. We were trying to protect both of our children. By choosing one, I said. My father finally spoke. You were unstable. I was homeless, I replied. Tyler's eyes flicked toward me, then away. Victoria cleared her throat. Let's address legal exposure. When a joint account holder transfers funds without documented consent, and those funds are used to shield assets before bankruptcy, trustees examine whether the transfer constitutes a fraudulent conveyance. My mother's face went pale. Fraud. It's a legal term, Victoria said calmly. Intent and documentation matter. There was no intent to defraud, my father insisted. Then documentation should reflect that, she replied. Silence pressed in again. Tyler ran a hand through his hair. So what? You want to drag this into court? That helps no one. I want accuracy, I said. He looked at me sharply. This is revenge. No, I said quietly. Revenge would be signing and letting you all collapse without clarity. He scoffed. Victoria leaned closer to the camera. If Ms. Davis chooses not to sign the affidavit as drafted, she retains the right to pursue civil recovery for unauthorized transfer. She also retains the right to cooperate fully with the bankruptcy trustee. My father's fingers tightened around his folder. You'd expose us? You exposed me, I said. My mother's voice trembled. You're going to destroy this family. The family fractured 6 years ago, I replied. Tyler stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Sit down, my father said sharply. Tyler hesitated, then dropped back into his chair. Victoria's tone remained steady. The question today is simple.
Do you want to correct the record privately with accurate documentation, or do you want a trustee and potentially a court to reconstruct it for you?
No one answered immediately. I closed the bank statement and folded my hands on the table. You wanted my signature, I said. Instead, you're getting terms. My father looked at me, really looked at me, as if trying to find the version of me who used to ask for permission.
She's serious,
Tyler muttered under his breath. Yes, Victoria said. She is. I leaned back slightly. 6 years ago, I stood outside your door asking for help, I said. Today, you're asking me to protect your house. The difference is, this time I decide what opens and what stays closed. No one argued with that. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen before in that room. Not superiority, not control, fear, and finally, balance. Silence settled over Aunt Eleanor's dining room like dust after something had shattered. No one shouted. No one stormed out. They just sat there, staring at the documents that refused to look away. My attorney's voice came through the speaker, steady and clear. At this point, this isn't simply a disagreement between relatives. It's documented financial exposure. Tyler let out a sharp breath. You're making this sound criminal. It could become that, Victoria replied calmly, depending on how the bankruptcy trustee interprets the transfer. My mother's fingers tightened around the edge of the table.
We did what we thought was best.
For who? I asked. For the family, she said. The family didn't include Mason that night, I answered. Tyler rolled his eyes. We're still talking about the porch? Yes, I said quietly. We are. My father leaned forward, voice low. Brooklyn, tell us what you want. There it was. Not apology, not regret. Terms. I took a slow breath. I want a written admission, I said. All three of you. That the funds were transferred without my explicit authorization. Tyler stiffened. Absolutely not. Victoria didn't miss a beat. Refusing to clarify increases risk under review. I'm not signing a confession, Tyler snapped. It's not a confession, I said. It's a correction. My mother's voice trembled. This is revenge. If I wanted revenge, I said evenly, I'd walk out and let the trustee discover everything without context. That quieted the room. I also want full cooperation with the bankruptcy trustee, I continued. Complete disclosure of where the money went. No obstruction. My father's face drained of color. That exposes us. You already are exposed, Victoria said gently. And, I said, my voice steady, I want a written apology to Mason. Tyler's head snapped up. He doesn't even remember that night. That's not the point, I replied. My mother swallowed hard. You would keep him from us? Yes, I said. The word didn't shake. I want a legally enforceable no-contact agreement. You don't call. You don't show up. You don't send birthday cards. If he wants to find you when he's an adult, that's his choice, not yours. My father stared at me as if I had become someone unrecognizable. You're tearing the family apart, my mother whispered. The family split when you chose which house to save, I said. Tyler stood up and began pacing. This is insane. We can work out a repayment plan. I'll pay you back over time. With what? I asked. The business is bankrupt. He stopped pacing. We can restructure it as a loan. He tried. Retroactively. Victoria's voice cut in. Altering documentation retroactively during bankruptcy review would significantly increase liability. Tyler glared at the laptop screen. My father rubbed his temples. What happens if we refuse? I file a civil claim, I said, and provide the trustee with every document I have. And then, he pressed,
Then this leaves this room.
The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. My mother's eyes filled, not with remorse, but with fear.
Give us time,
my father said quietly. 48 hours. I looked at Victoria on the screen. She gave a small nod. You have 48 hours? I said. After that, I moved forward. The meeting ended without hugs. They left together. I stayed behind with Aunt Eleanor for a few minutes, sitting in the quiet after the door closed. You were calm, she said softly. I learned, I replied. That evening, Mason sat at the kitchen island doing homework, his pencil tapping lightly against the page. Was Grandpa mad? He asked. No, I said. He was worried. About what? Losing control, I said. He nodded as if that made sense. That night, I lay awake for a while. Was I being harsh? Was cutting contact too much? Then I remembered the grocery store parking lot, the way Mason had asked if Grandma was mad at him, the way I had stared at a porch light that never flickered toward welcome. 48 hours later, a courier knocked on my door. Certified envelope. Inside were 3 notarized statements. My father's admission was the longest. He acknowledged that the transfer occurred without documented consent and that the funds had been redirected to Tyler's business obligations. My mother's was shorter, carefully worded but clear. Tyler's statement confirmed he received the funds and did not independently verify authorization. Attached was a separate letter addressed to Mason. Formal, structured. Apologizing for not being present during a difficult time. It didn't undo anything, but it didn't deny it either. I read them once, then twice. I forwarded copies to Victoria, then I placed the originals into a folder labeled closed. That night, I blocked their numbers again, permanently this time. Updated my emergency contacts at work. Removed their names from every form that mattered. No explosion, no screaming phone calls, no dramatic collapse. Just notarized silence. They didn't lose the house because of me. They almost lost it because they bet on the wrong future. 6 years ago, I stood outside their door waiting. This time, they were the ones waiting, and I didn't leave them outside. I just made them sign before they stepped anywhere near my life again. 1 year later, I stood in front of a navy blue door that belonged to me. The paint was still fresh. The brass numbers gleamed in the afternoon light. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even large. Just a modest townhouse in Campbell with 2 bedrooms upstairs and a narrow strip of yard in the back. But the key in my hand felt heavier than any document I had signed. Mason ran past me before I could even finish unlocking it. "It echoes!" he shouted from inside, his voice bouncing off empty walls. I stepped in slowly. No borrowed furniture, no temporary couch, no air mattress in a corner. Just open space and sunlight pouring through the windows. I closed the door behind me and listened to the click of the lock. It sounded like finality. Aunt Eleanor came by that afternoon with a small houseplant wrapped in brown paper. "For the entryway," she said, setting it on the kitchen counter. "So something living greets you." 2 co-workers stopped in later with a toolbox and pizza. Mason's best friend from school raced up and down the hallway like it was a racetrack. There were no cards in the mail from my parents. No congratulatory texts. No quiet attempts to break the no-contact agreement. Just silence. The kind that didn't feel heavy anymore. That evening, after everyone left, I opened the folder I'd labeled closed. Inside were the notarized admissions and the apology letter addressed to Mason. I'd read it when it arrived a year ago. I hadn't shown him all of it. I unfolded it again. "We regret not being available during a difficult time. We acknowledge mistakes in judgment. We wish you stability and success." It was careful, legal, measured. It wasn't warm, but it was true enough. I placed it back in the folder and slid it into the top drawer of my desk. Apologies matter. Presence matters more. Mason wandered into the living room, and flopped onto the carpet. "Is this really ours?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "No one can tell us to leave." "No one." He stared at the ceiling for a moment, thinking. "Are Grandma and Grandpa ever coming here?" he asked. The question didn't catch me off guard the way it would have a year ago. I knelt down so we were eye level. "Only people who knock because they love us get to come inside," I said. He considered that. "So if they knock nice?" "If they knock with love," I corrected gently. He nodded as if he understood the difference. "Okay," he said. "Then I'll listen." That night, after he fell asleep in his new room with his dinosaur perched on the pillow, I stepped outside onto the small front porch. The navy door stood behind me. 6 years ago, I had stood outside another door with one suitcase and a 5-year-old boy asking to be let in. That door never opened. I used to think that was the moment I lost my family. Now I see it differently. That was the moment I stopped confusing access with love. Revenge wasn't what I expected it to be. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't watching them fall apart. It was refusing to rewrite what happened. It was saying no to a version of the story where I was unstable and they were saviors. It was holding on to receipts until the truth had no choice but to stand in the room with us. Boundaries didn't destroy my family. They revealed it. I don't check public records anymore to see what's happening with their house. I don't rehearse arguments in the shower. I don't wonder whether they understand what they did. Understanding isn't required for closure. Choices. I chose not to sign. I chose documentation over denial. I chose my son over their narrative. Mason shuffled in his sleep upstairs, and the house felt less echoing now, less empty, full. 6 years ago, I stood outside a door that wouldn't open. Today, I own the door, and I decide who walks through it. If you've ever been told you were tearing your family apart just because you refused to be silent, I want you to know something. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, I'd love to hear which one you chose. Leave it in the comments. Someone reading your story might be standing outside their own closed door tonight, thinking they're alone. They're not. And if stories about boundaries, financial justice, and rebuilding after family betrayal resonate with you, stay here. There are more conversations like this, more doors to talk about, more truths that deserve light. Blood doesn't open doors. Love does. And once you learn the difference, you never stand on the wrong porch again.